Hello and welcome to Living Fabulously with Bev. Today my guest is Dr. Tom O Bryan. And Dr. Tom is a functional medicine practitioner as well as an author of a book called The Autoimmune Fix. Welcome to you, Dr. Tom.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be with you. And especially because you're in Australia. I love Australia and Australians. They're just the best people. You know, I'm going to tell you a joke to start off with. This is really funny. I was on stage in the Gold Coast, a full day event. And at one point I was talking about how people sometimes don't want to give up the things they love to eat. And when they give up some things, but not others, and then they continue to feel a little bit better, but not great. And I said, and people sometimes just don't want to give up their ding-dongs and ho-hos. And the entire audience started laughing, just this deep belly laugh. And I thought, well, you know, it's a little bit funny, but it's not that funny. And I found out at the break what that means in Australia. You know, in the US, those are cheap foods. They're not very good for you. But ever since then, I've just had a warm place in my heart for Australia. So thank you so much for this interview today.
That's brilliant. It's sort of it's similar because I'm South African living in Australia. So when I first got here, I also had to learn a new form of English.
Yes.
So Dr. Tom, tell me about yourself and what it is that you do.
Well, I opened a practice in Chicago on Valentine's Day in 1980. And the day I came out in practice, we already were holistic, comprehensive health. I had been studying with Dr. Jeffrey Bland, the founder of functional medicine. And I actually was in his first talk in Chicago in 1978. And we couldn't get pregnant. My wife and I could not get pregnant when I was in school. So I called the 7 most famous holistic doctors I'd ever heard of. And I asked them, what do you do for infertility? And they would say, well, you know what a category 1 is? And I'd say, no. And they said, learn. I said, okay, category 1. And I'd make lists of everything they said. I put a program together and we were pregnant in 6 weeks. Wow. My neighbors in married housing, we lived on campus. I was just going into my internship. They had gone through artificial insemination. Nothing had worked for them. So they asked if I'd work with them. And I said, well, it won't hurt you. Yeah, it's all natural. Sure. They were pregnant in 3 months. So before I got out in practice, I was hot to trot to help every couple get pregnant who was having a hard time. And we opened our practice. We had 33 new patients our first day. You know, it was just fabulous. We were well received, and we've helped hundreds and hundreds of people with infertility problems and but you know, there's not much in medicine that's all or every. This is an every person that had hormone imbalances of any type, whether it was infertility, premature ejaculation, ovarian cysts, any person with hormone related problems, they always had foods that they were eating that weren't good for them, and they didn't know that they were not good for them. Every single person. And the most common food turned out to be wheat. And so I read the literature on wheat and kept reading more research articles. And celiac disease back then was what everyone knew about for wheat sensitivity. And then I started talking about this and teaching about this. And by 2004, I was on stage at professional events, symposiums, and conferences talking about the dangers of wheat with or without celiac disease. And I've become known for that. I travel the world teaching about the wheat sensitivities, food sensitivities, and the development of autoimmune diseases. So I retired from practice a number of years ago, and I travel and teach. I just have come back from Brazil. And before that, I was Italy and Spain and Portugal. So I carry this message out, and it's really wonderful when I see the doctors in the audience go, yeah, because they just didn't know. I just show them the science, and I just show the study after study after study. And so My goal and what we do now is we have a website, thedr.com, thedoctor.com, don't spell the word doctor out. And our goal is just to teach people, to give them the information that they can take back to their doctors and say, please do this test. This sounds like this might be a problem for me. Please, let's just check and see. And so the bottom line, because I'm always asked, who should be tested for a sensitivity to wheat, as an example? And the answer comes from my good friend, Dr. Rodney Ford, who is in Christchurch, New Zealand. And Rodney is a pediatric gastroenterologist and a board-certified allergist. And he was a pioneer talking about problems in kids with wheat back in the early 1990s. And standing on stage, and he's taken all the shots from his peers saying that he's a nutcase. And now we know, of course, he was right on the money. And what Dr. Ford says when he's asked the question, who should be checked? He said, well, anyone who is sick. So if you're trying your healthcare protocols, to be healthy, whatever they are, and they're working not very well, or they're not completely doing the job, you're sick. And just check and see if the most common food that people eat 2, 3, 4, 5 times a day, every day, if that food is a problem for you. And by the time you feel sick when you eat the food, it's way down the path. You've got autoimmune diseases by then. Yeah. So you don't feel when you're eating something that's not good for you most of the time. You don't feel it in your stomach. Those are the lucky ones that feel in the stomach. So anyway, that's how I got into all of this. And I travel the world now, and we just published this book recently, The Autoimmune Fix. Shameless plug, shameless plug. So we talk a lot about autoimmunity and how it might manifest.
And Dr. Tom, so it's clear that you're passionate about health. So that's why we're talking today. But why does autoimmune disease occur?
What most people don't, most doctors don't know, we think the number one cause of getting sick and dying is heart disease. And many, many studies say that. But when you look at the mechanisms that initiate the whole plugging up of your pipes called atherosclerosis, it's autoimmune. So the autoimmune mechanism is the mechanism that sets up cardiovascular disease, it sets up cancer, it sets up Alzheimer's, it sets up Parkinson's. So this mechanism of your immune system attacking your own tissue, auto, meaning your own tissue, autoimmune, that mechanism is the primary mechanism in getting sick and dying in the world. That means for almost everyone, there's an autoimmune mechanism going on. Now, an autoimmune mechanism doesn't necessarily cause an autoimmune disease. It takes many years. Let me give you an example. When you do a blood test for thyroid, as an example, and you want to see if you have an autoimmune thyroid disease, they measure antibodies to thyroid. And there's a normal reference range when the blood test comes back, the results. If you're within these numbers, you're okay. And if it's above that, you got a problem. So why would we ever have any antibodies to our thyroid? Why is it okay for the immune system to attack your own tissue? Mrs. Patient, you have an entire new body every 7 years. Entirely new body. Some cells turn over very quickly every 3 to 5 days for the inside lining of your gut. Some cells are very slow, like your bone cells, but every cell turns over. So you're always building a new body. Well, how do you do that? Well, you get rid of the old and damaged cells to make room for the new cells. Well, how do you do that? That's your immune system making antibodies to your thyroid to get rid of the old thyroid cells, the damaged thyroid cells. Your immune system makes antibodies to your muscles or to your bones or to your kidneys or to your eyes. And you get rid of the old damaged cells, which makes room for new cells. That's how we generate healthy, stronger bodies, right? So most of us are losing more cells than we're making. We call that getting old. And when you start a program that's different, 6 months later, people say, wow, you look so different. What are you doing? That's when you're getting younger because you're making more cells than you're losing, right?
Yeah.
But the way you get rid of those old and damaged cells is by your immune system making antibodies to those old and damaged cells. So that's normal. But when you have elevated antibodies to your thyroid, blood test comes back and there's an H next to it, meaning high. When you have elevated antibodies, you're killing off more cells than you're making. And when you keep doing that over time, killing off more cells than you're making, eventually that tissue can't work as well as it's supposed to. Like if your thyroid doesn't work as well as it's supposed to, you get cold hands and feet, you wear socks to bed, you can't wake up in the morning, you hit that snooze a few times, you wish you had 20 more minutes in bed, you don't lose weight even if you don't eat for 2 days, you can't lose weight. Sluggish thyroid is a very common mechanism for those types of symptoms. So you just feel kind of lousy, but your immune system still is killing off more cells than you're making, killing off more cells, killing off more cells. So months and months of these symptoms, they get a little better, they get a little worse. You keep getting more of these symptoms and more until eventually you go to a doctor, he thinks you're fine, it's all in your head. And then you go to another doctor, and eventually they do a blood test and they see you've got elevated antibodies to your thyroid, you have an autoimmune thyroid disease. But it started way back here when the antibodies were first elevated. That's when it starts, not here when the tissue is all damaged and it can't keep up anymore and now you're getting symptoms, right? So this autoimmune spectrum is really important to understand, because once you understand this, now remember, it's the #1 cause of getting sick and dying in the world, your immune system attacking your own tissue, the number one mechanism. Once you understand this, then you want to say, well, I feel okay, but do I have any antibodies elevated to my brain right now, or to my heart, or my lungs, or my liver? And then you start checking to see. You do a blood test and you find out. You say, oh my gosh, I've got elevated antibodies to myelin. Well, myelin is the saran wrap around your nerves to protect your nerves. And when you kill off myelin, kill off myelin, kill off myelin, kill off myelin, you're wiping away the insulation around the nerves. Now imagine the wire that goes from the battery of the car to the headlights. Now you take the insulation off that wire somewhere in the middle, and you see the exposed wire, and then have the exposed wire touch the frame of the car. The lights flicker on and off. And you say, what's wrong with the lights? Well, there's nothing wrong with the lights, right? It's the insulation. This is MS. That's what MS is. When you've killed off enough myelin that the nerves can't carry the message to your muscles or to your brain or wherever the symptoms are. My point is, there is this spectrum, and most of us don't know, almost all of us don't know where we are on the spectrum and what antibodies are elevated right now. For example, one more thing, and then this is question #1, right? For example, everyone knows someone that had a heart attack and is now thriving. They changed their diet, they're exercising a little bit, they're thriving. Everyone knows someone that had cancer and they went through the treatment protocol and it's all in remission and they're feeling good. No one knows anyone diagnosed with a brain deterioration disease who's thriving. It terrifies us. It really terrifies us, because the whole pharmaceutical industry is based around trying to fix that one symptom, whatever the symptom is. You're never going to do that, because by the time your brain is not functioning very well, there's a whole checklist of things that are going on, and you have to look and see, do they have this? Do they have that? Do they have this? Do they have that? And when you identify what the mechanisms are on the spectrum that's causing all of this, and you fix the mechanisms, all of a sudden your brain starts feeling better. 2 to 3 months down the road, you're back. You're back.
That's amazing. Because you've mentioned there about, like the obvious impact on the body, the outward impact. So fatigue, weight gain, inflammation, right, all of those sort of things. But then why is autoimmune disease on the rise?
Really good question. Critically important question. And that's all outlined in here. Shameless plug, shameless plug. I think everyone needs to read this book. This is 35 years of my life in here. And there's over 300 references. But I'll tell you, of course, the answer. But you get it in great detail. And I'll give you an example afterwards. Why is this happening? Because we are exposed to more toxic chemicals now than ever before in the history of mankind. And these things accumulate in your body. In Norway, the government had a commission, 3 years. They were debating, should we recommend our pregnant women not to breastfeed a first baby after birth? Should we recommend that? For 3 years, they were talking about it. Why? Because the PCBs, these toxic chemicals that are in the fish, because the fjords, you know, where Norway is, the fish are in these fjords, but the agricultural runoff goes down into the fjords, and it's a narrow area, and so this salt water in there is just loaded with these PCBs, so the fish are loaded with PCBs. And you eat the fish, you can't tell, it tastes good, but these PCBs accumulate in your body. So 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years of these minute amounts, which are not bad, toxic by themselves, but the accumulation of them builds up. And these chemicals have an affinity for estrogen-loving cells. That's why they're called endocrine or hormone-disrupting chemicals, because they bind on estrogen-loving cells. And for men, that's in the testes, and that's why guys have lower sperm counts now. It's a big, big problem, and lower testosterone levels. But for women, it's the uterus and the breast. So the breasts of young women, fertile women, are loaded with these PCBs, not just from fish, but from the water we're drinking and many other sources. And when a woman has a first child and the mammary glands start producing milk, the lactation process begins, the milk that's coming out is loaded with PCBs, loaded. And these PCBs are brain disrupting chemicals. It changes how the brains develop in newborns. And it changes how the brain functions, the hormones called neurotransmitters that it makes. So the debate was, should we tell women not to breastfeed a first baby? Because after the first baby, the next baby's fine, because she's emptied all the years of accumulative poison that's in her body. That's been emptied now. But it's the first baby. And they finally concluded, and they said, no, they should breastfeed. It's much more important. There are more benefits to breastfeeding than detriments. That was the conclusion of the study. But that's an example of these toxic chemicals. I'll give you one more example, and that's men. They did a meta-analysis, which means they looked at a lot of studies on one subject. And they looked at sperm count in men between 1974 and 2011. So in 37 years, 186 studies all over the world, 186 different research teams studying this one topic. What'd they find out? And these are healthy men, not infertile men, healthy men. There is on average a 59% reduction in sperm counts in healthy men. Now, what does that mean? Scientists fear extinction of a species at 72% loss of sperm. We're at 59% in 37 years. What do you think is going to happen in the next 20 years with all the chemicals we're exposed to? The flame retardant chemicals in your comforter on your bed. How many people you know whose lives have been saved because they wore clothes or slept under flame retardant chemicals? I don't know many. And this stuff accumulates in your body. The BPA in the plastic lids on coffee cups that drips back into the coffee, and you drink it, and the hot beverage hits the underside of the lid, and it tapers down into the opening, and you're drinking your coffee full of bisphenol A. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. So we're exposed to all these toxic chemicals. That's the threat. Now, Mrs. Patient, your immune system is the armed forces in your body. It's the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, the Marines, the Coast Guard. It's there to protect you. So when these toxic chemicals come in, your immune system has to get rid of these things as best as it can. And your immune system is fighting so hard every single day to protect you. So it's firing these chemical bullets from the antibodies to these toxic chemicals to try and protect you. But these toxic chemicals get stored inside your tissue, inside your cells. So when your immune system's trying to protect you by killing off the bisphenol A, it also is going after the myelin that the bisphenol A is inside of, or it's going after the brain cells that the bisphenol A is inside of, or it's going after the brain cells that the bacteria or the viruses are inside of. And so your immune system killing off the bacteria, for example, with Lyme disease, killing off the bacteria causes collateral damage, and you damage the brain cells around where the Lyme disease bacteria is. Now you have to make more antibodies to get rid of the damaged brain cells to make new brain cells. But because it's going on and on and on and on, and it just keeps going like this, eventually you start killing off your cells. That's autoimmunity. So it's an immune system that's trying to protect you. So you never want to shut down the immune system, suppress, well, rarely, sometimes you do, but rarely. You want to encourage the immune system and get rid of the threat. So that's the big deal, get rid of the threat. And that's what the Autoimmune Fix is about. And we traveled the world, and I interviewed 85 of the world's leaders in autoimmunity, the scientists whose research papers I had read. And then I interviewed the doctors who were doing what the research scientists said to do for rheumatoid arthritis or for MS or whatever it should be. And then I interviewed the patients of the doctors who had reversed their MS. And you hear this 44-year-old woman in London, lovely lady. And she said, you know, I took the tube to come here today for this interview. This tube station is 7 blocks from here. I walked. That's not a big deal. And then she paused, and you saw tears in her eyes, and she said, but it is. 2 years ago, I was in a wheelchair, and I had 8 lesions on my brain. And you see the MRI with these little white spots on it. Now today, I only have 2 lesions on the brain, and I don't have any symptoms. So we put together betrayal. The scientists, the doctors, the patients. And we made a story out of it. There's 9 episodes. They're all about an hour. It's all free. It's online at thedr.com, thedoctor.com/betrayal. And we've had over 500,000 people watch this. And it's free to everyone. So feel thedoctor.com/betrayal. And I talk all about this and about where do these diseases come from? Where do these brain diseases come from? Where do the heart diseases come from? And when you learn this stuff, you start asking